today's Cornerstone webinar. My name is Christina Carter Grant, and I serve as the Senior Program Officer for National Leadership in Education here at the Center for Community Progress. Cornerstone is our webinar series, which equips participants with the building blocks to understand and solve tough challenges related to property vacancy, abandonment, and deterioration. For today's Cornerstone, we are joined by Kim Graziani, Christopher Norman, and Amanda Ryan. Kim Graziani is the president and CEO of Indigo Collaborative, LLC, a national consulting firm dedicated to building trust and sharing power between local government and residents to equitably revitalize community, and serves as the technical assistant senior advisor at the Center for Community Progress. Over the past 10 years, Kim helped build and lead Community Progress's National Technical Assistance Program, which has served over 300 communities in 35 states. She is considered one of the leading national experts in land banks, and her most recent publications have focused on land banks and community land trusts, including a chapter in the research volume from the Federal Reserve Banks of Atlanta and Cleveland entitled Tackling Vacancy and Abandonment, Strategies and Impacts After the Great Recession, as well as a Center for Community Progress publication entitled Land Banks and Community Land Trusts, Partnering to Provide Equitable Housing Opportunities Now and for Future Generations. Christopher Norman, Executive Director of the Metro Atlanta Land Bank since 2010, has led the restructuring and rebranding of the land bank, expansion of its programmatic initiative, and increases in its funding. He also serves as the president of the Georgia Association of Land Bank Authorities, which was instrumental in facilitating the passage of the Georgia Land Bank Act by the Georgia legislature in 2012. Additionally, Mr. Norman served as the chairman of the board of directors of the Atlanta Land Trust for 7 years, ending in 2021. Amanda Ryan is a seasoned real estate professional with extensive experience facilitating public-private partnerships and community development. Prior to joining the Atlanta Land Trust, Ms. Ryan led the Transit-Oriented Development Initiative at MARTA, resulting in the redevelopment of over 35 acres of underutilized surface parking at 8 heavy rail stations. Ms. Ryan spent almost 10 years at Invest Atlanta, where she managed Atlanta's primary economic development tools, which catalyzed over 30 projects, resulting in the investment of $3.5 billion in Atlanta's most underserved communities. Before turning it over to Kim, I want to mention that we will allot time at the end of the presentations for questions. If you have a question, you want to click the stage tab, and then on the right side of your screen, select chat and then type your question into the chat box. We will share a copy of the presentation slides as well as the recording of the webinar within a week or so of this presentation. And lastly, if you experience any technical difficulties, feel free to shoot me an email at ccarter@communityprogress.org. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Kim.
Great. Thanks, Christina. And thank you to Chris and Amanda, my fellow presenters, for joining us today. And thank you in advance for sharing your truth and expertise to all of the participants. And a very big thanks to all of you who have joined us today and for your interest in land banks and CLTs. We're all living in a pretty crazy world, and there's lots of stuff going on. So for you all to take the time and to join us for this lunchtime webinar, it's greatly appreciated. So today we are going to start off with a little bit of a foundation of making sure everyone understands what a land bank and a community land trust, or CLT, is, how they're different yet complementary. We're going to talk a little bit about what are the benefits of a land bank and CLT to consider a partnership. Then the fun stuff happens where we're actually going to hear from the folks in Atlanta about what has come out of their land bank CLT partnership, who they are, where they're going next. And then lastly, we're going to talk about what's needed to scale up, and then of course field your questions. And if we don't get to them all today, then happy to follow up with you all afterwards. Okay, so let's start with how a land bank works. So I think we're all familiar with those properties in our communities that the private market has rejected. Everyone has said nothing can happen with them. They're vacant, they're abandoned, they're tax delinquent, they're very difficult to get clear title on given past ownership and heir property issues. They're underwater in value, right? The amount of money it would cost to rehab, construct, demolish, so on, is much more than what the property is actually worth. Yet, those properties continue to harm a community. They continue to cost local government money and public safety and lost taxes, and continue to negatively impact the people who live around that property. So a land bank is an entity that, with the right legal powers through state or local law, can actually unlock that property, extinguish the back taxes and liens, get this magical thing called clear title and title insurance, which you all know is very important in any kind of development project. It maintains the property, it can assemble more parcels. And then what makes it different than a local government is it actually has a lot more flexibility in how it sells property to responsible buyers. It's much more flexible in determining a price point. It is selling properties to people according to local community goals. So it is a public entity that has a hyper focus on the most problematic properties to support local community goals. And now let's go to a community land trust. So a community land trust generally is a nonprofit organization. They acquire properties in focused geographies. Not every community land trust is focused on permanent affordability, although many of them are. They do the rehab, construction, so on, of the actual structures. They do a lot of work in terms of cultivating responsible buyers. The unique thing about a CLT, though, is that when they buy a property, the land stays in ownership with the community land trust. And the reason for that is that allows them to ensure that that property stays affordable in perpetuity. So an interested buyer will purchase the actual structure on the land, and they'll also have a lease with the CLT. They purchase the property at an affordable price point. And then when that person is interested in selling, they are able to recoup a lot of the equity that they put into that. But they're also able to get a portion of the appreciation of the price point on that property. So how much that property is appreciated in value, the CLT homeowner is able to recoup a portion of that. And that's why it's called a shared equity homeownership model. The really interesting and exciting part about this is not only do these properties stay affordable, the CLT really is a permanent steward for these properties. They make sure that that property stays affordable for future generations. And they also make sure that whatever subsidy is used to build, construct, renovate that property to sell at an affordable price, that it actually stays with that property for a lifetime. So here's just a quick reference chart that you all can take a look at some point. That gives just a little summary again of the differences yet similarities between land banks and CLTs. I think just to reiterate the highlights is land banks are public entities. They do have limited governmental powers, again, with state laws and local powers. Community land trusts are generally private nonprofits. The board structure could be somewhat similar, but I think what really distinguishes a community land trust is what they call a tripartite board. And that really involves community land trust residents, other community residents in that geography, and nonprofit and public representatives to really ensure that there is more of a community control in the decision-making and what happens with that organization. And then, of course, it's the tenure of ownership, right? Most land banks don't want to hold the land for perpetuity. Some do hold it for longer amounts of time, but that is really the bread and butter of the CLT, is to make sure that they continue to own the property, to make sure that that property stays affordable, and that there are responsible people living in it. So we at Community Progress and our partners at Grounded Solutions Network, who works with the majority of CLTs across the country, We have been getting really excited for a while now about the possibility of land banks and CLTs partnering. And so, why would that be important and why is that an opportunity? So, one of the greatest challenges for a lot of land banks is finding responsible buyers that align with community goals. And one of the biggest challenges for a lot of community land trusts is being able to acquire that property in a cost effective manner. So, land banks, given their superpowers of creating a pipeline, really can address some of a community land trust's greatest challenges by transferring that property for a discounted price to the CLT. To the right of the screen, you'll see that there's a map. And what this shows is this is a working map, so we continue to get information on this. But the green dots show those communities across the country that have a land bank and a community land trust working in the same shared geography. They may not be partnering, but they actually share a service area. The yellow dots are communities that we are aware of that have formalized their partnership in some way, shape, or form. So what you'll see is there's not a lot of yellow dots on the screen. So that's again why we're really excited to talk with you all about this and say that not every community needs a land bank or a CLT, and not every community that has both of those organizations should partner. But we really think there may be an opportunity to expand this across the country. So again, how could they partner? Land bank clears the title, gets the property, transfers it to a community land trust for a discounted price. And then the CLTs does what they do best, right? They find the homeowner and they're the perpetual stewards of that property. There's different models of partnership, right? So everything from a very sort of a lower P partnership, which we would consider more transactional, where a CLT essentially buys a property or applies to the land bank for a property just like any other entity. A lot of times these transactions between a land bank and a CLT actually turn into a more formalized partnership down the road, to probably the most formal partnership, which is what we call the subsidiary. There's only one example that we're aware of, which is in Columbus, Ohio, Franklin County, where the CLT has actually become a subsidiary of the land bank. What you'll hear a little bit about later today is the agreement form of partnership, which is exactly what Atlanta has, where they have really formalized their partnership through an MOU, and they've determined mutual goals. They have outlined exactly what that incentive is for that partnership to work, and also are beginning to talk about a proactive strategy, right? Are there ways that the land bank could be more proactive in acquiring properties for permanent affordable housing along the way? So even though there are not that many examples of partnerships, what we found that with talking with land bank and CLT leaders across the country, the most successful partnerships have some combination of these 5 things. So the racial equity piece is incredibly important for so many reasons, but as I'm sure most of you know, communities where land banks work have a lot of vacancy and abandonment and disinvestment. And too many times across the country, those are also communities of color. It's also those communities that do not have equal access to affordable home ownership. So for a land bank and a community land trust to really recognize some of the racial inequities that are happening and to partner to address those is incredibly powerful. Obviously, there has to be a commitment to quality affordable housing, and that really has to start with not only the grassroots level, but also political levels to ensure that there is enough funding. And, I'll just say the last one, which I think that Chris and Amanda will talk about in a little bit, which is the importance of having dedicated, flexible funding and capital. And really, if the biggest sort of question we have is why are there not more partnerships? A lot of people say if we had funding, we would partner with our land bank. And the ability to have flexible grant dollars to support these partnerships is critical to make sure that the actual homes themselves are at the most affordable price point. So now I'm going to turn it over to Chris and Amanda. They are just an example of one of the longest standing and model land bank CLT partnerships. They have formalized their partnership in 2020, and we'll talk a little bit more about their permanent affordability pilot program and the depository program. But I just want to thank them both for sharing their insights, and I will turn it over to Chris first.
Kim, thank you so much for all that good information. It's always good to be here with you and good to be here with Amanda as well. And so happy to be here and share some information from and some of our experiences here in Atlanta, particularly from the land bank side of the ledger. And so, as Kim has pointed out, I've been with this land bank for over a decade, kind of really trying to help move it forward and kind of involved in the discussion around Georgia. And so, like a lot of land banks, our mission is fairly clear. We primarily operate within the city of Atlanta. One unique feature about Fulton County, in which we reside, is it is actually completely municipalized. So whereas we used to operate in an unincorporated portions of Fulton, there are no longer unincorporated portions of Fulton County. And so we actually operate throughout the entirety of the city of Atlanta, and there's a possibility of additional expansion to surrounding cities in the near term. But our mission is fairly straightforward, just as Kim pointed out before. We really focus on these non-revenue, these non-tax producing or kind of sideline properties and getting them back into some productive use, which is not only housing, but also can be public space, green space, industry jobs, and things of that nature. And we do have that unique superpower where we can extinguish delinquent tax liens, which is an important tool, particularly when you deal with distressed property that's been sitting around for some time and is basically developed, delinquent taxes in arrears. And it kind of, particularly if you're doing affordable housing, is really impactful on your budget, your total development costs that you basically put into that project. So that is something we point out. So next slide, Kim. And just want to give folks a sense of the scale of the land bank. One thing is that, land banks, find themselves, particularly I know in our some of our southern projects, particularly in Georgia, cash is king and cash is tight. So this kind of shows you a sense of how we achieve scale via leverage of external partners. So, we're governed by a board of directors, just like all the land banks. So we have 7 directors with seats up to 11. But you see how the blue boxes basically demonstrate the FTEs. These are actually full-time employees of the actual land bank, right? But you see a lot of other boxes here, and those are green. Those are really contractors, external partners that we basically leverage to give us the scale of a much larger organization so that we can be impactful. Because what we do is it's not necessarily can be accomplished just via the 5 people you see represented here on the screen. In the blue boxes, we definitely have to rely all on our partners and things of that nature. And then also you'll see with the orange boxes with our municipal partners, the city of Atlanta and Fulton County also provide assistance via legal support. And we also leverage all their other resources that they have to avail in their respective organizations. So just want to give you a sense of kind of who are we talking about? Is it more than Chris and things of that nature? And just, anecdotally through the state of Georgia, the majority of land banks in the state of Georgia have 1 person, maybe 2. And so they also tend to do the similar things that I'm doing here, which is kind of leverage us up and achieve scale. So that's a critical thing as you all think about how do we execute throughout the country. Think about also partnership and leverage and utility of outside parties. So you can go to the next slide, Kim. So this is part of a kind of a broad strategy that we are utilizing, which kind of leads to how do we acquire property. And I like to show people this because this is kind of consolidates a lot of conversations I have with people about how do you get this piece of property into our possession. And so you kind of see these vertical and horizontal axes. The top horizontal axis really shows the types of bad conditions, right? These are things that are delinquent, it's foreclosed, it's blighted, it's sitting out there as criminal. And then you have the vertical axis, which starts showing you, okay, fine, if we as a community recognize it's in this bad status, then how do we start moving it to a more productive solution? And then you start seeing the vertical axis, and then also, well, who gets involved, the resources. And then, of course, at the bottom right corner this is what we all work towards, which is our nirvana condition. We want good and productive property. So get rid of all the stuff on the top line, Let's move it to the bottom. And so I do want to point out, in the second bar, you start looking at these multiple ways of which we can acquire property, in which we do. Sometimes parties will donate property. Particularly, that happens typically not during the run-ups of the real estate market, but people do inherit property. They do walk away. They can donate property to us, and we have received those. We have judicial interim tax foreclosure, which is another tool that land banks can use, and we have received property that way. If you have capital available, you can actually entertain and enter into market negotiated purchases, just like anyone on the street. And then also we have code enforcement liens, demolition liens, other things of that nature that you can actually foreclose on. And we're actually in that process with the city. And then lastly, your law enforcement partners can actually seize property that's basically involved in some level of criminal activity, and those can find their ways to your land bank to be repurposed as well. So I just want to kind of give you some sense of kind of who we are, how we can acquire property, and you'll see there are lots of steps and a lot of moving parts in this. So there's not one way to basically achieve your outcomes, and then we ultimately trying to get to the bottom line. So you can move to our next slide here.
And Chris, just one thing, we're going to
Sure.
wait till the end, but there was a question that said that they assume that the power to extinguish taxes and liens comes from the city, county, and or state. And so just to clarify, it will either come from the state, which is, land bank enabling legislation that allows that, or there are some land banks that have that through their local home rule powers through an agreement. But Chris, is that correct for you all, given your Georgia Land Bank Act that allows you all that sort of superpower of lien extinguishment?
Yes, that is a great question. And Kim, thanks for making that clear, that it does vary across from state to state. But in the state of Georgia, it comes directly from the Georgia state law. And so this is at the state level, any land bank throughout the state of Georgia inherits this power to extinguish taxes. And part of your organizational framework, you are established in Georgia by the county and at least one city in that county. So going into it, creating your land bank, you've already agreed up front that this is an essential power and tool that we want to use. And therefore, in your MOU between the city, the intergovernmental between the city and the county, you've laid that out. And if you're basic consolidated government, that's kind of inherent there. But yes, that is not something that you can decide to do if you have a land bank that's been set up outside of the Land Bank Act. So you can have something that acts like a land bank, but you will not have the legal authority to extinguish taxes, which is something that's done in coordination with your board, which is representative of your city and county because they're political appointments, your school system, because typically the school board taxes are on that same tax bill. So they do have a say in that. And then lastly, you also have your tax commissioner that you're working with to actually do the extinguishment. So yes, it's a coordinated effort, but yes, that's an important point, that it must be via your authorizing party. So that kind of gives you a general sense of the land bank, kind of who we are, what we've been up to, and then we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about this partnership with Amanda. So Amanda, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Good afternoon, everybody. Happy to be here with you to share the work of the Land Trust and how we're partnering with the Land Bank. The Atlanta Land Trust is a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to deliver and steward permanently affordable housing to support inclusive and equitable communities near the BeltLine and other targeted areas of the city of Atlanta. And as Kim shared, we operate as a community land trust, which is a unique approach to doing this work in the city of Atlanta. You can go to the next slide, Kim. I wanted to share a little bit of history on the Atlanta Land Trust, most of which Chris has played an integral part in. So he could probably tell you this history better than I can, but since it's my organization, I'm going to take a shot at it. So the Atlanta Land Trust was initially created in 2009, and prior to its creation, there was a group of organizations that were convened under the leadership of the Atlanta BeltLine Partnership, the Annie E. Casey Foundation, and a group of CDCs here in Atlanta under the umbrella organization of AHAND. They were really seeking to create a new tool that could be implemented alongside our Atlanta BeltLine project to ensure that as gentrification occurred around that project, that the displacement was being mitigated. If you're not familiar with the Atlanta BeltLine, I would suggest looking it up. It's one of the largest urban redevelopment projects in the country. It's essentially the conversion of a 22-mile railroad corridor into a project that includes parks, green space, multi-use trails, and ultimately public transportation. So it has had a huge impact on the communities that abut it, and has attracted a significant amount of development and investment, and as a result has increased property values and pushed many people out of those immediately adjacent communities. And so we're working at the Land Trust around in that geography specifically to try and mitigate some of that displacement. So 2007, this group was convened. We engaged John Burlington, who is a national expert on community land trusts, to really facilitate this conversation and this evaluation of community land trusts. Again, ultimately in 2009, the group decided to move forward with the creation of what was then called the Atlanta CLT Collaborative. We received funding from a handful of organizations here in Atlanta and held our first board meeting in January of 2010. That same year, we hired our first executive director, Tony Pickett, who you may know is now the CEO of the Grounded Solutions Network, which is the national membership organization for community land trusts. Tony led the helm for a couple of years, working to implement what was then a central server model of community land trusts that was designed to facilitate the creation of small neighborhood-based community land trusts that would be supported by a hub organization that would provide the resources necessary for their success. That model was really challenging in Atlanta, I think, particularly because we were trying to implement this during the recession. But the CDC community in Atlanta wasn't strong enough to be able to allow for that model to work. So we ended up engaging another consultant, Julie Brunner, to conduct an organizational assessment to reevaluate the model. It was then decided to bring the organization back under one umbrella that would operate at a citywide scale. And Burlington Associates was brought in again to go through a business planning process, which was designed to operationalize the organization. In 2017, our name was changed to what it is today, the Atlanta Land Trust, Inc. And with that business plan, we were able to attract a grant from the Candida Fund. It was $1 million capacity building grant. And then my board of directors was able to, with those resources, then move forward with hiring full-time staff. So when I was hired in 2018, there had not been full-time staff at the organization for about 5 years. So under Chris's leadership, the board really was a working board that moved the organization forward, going through these various planning exercises and evaluation exercises so that we would best be positioned once we had staff and the appropriate resources to move forward with implementing the mission of the organization. So I started in 2018, and the board charged me when I was hired with really relaunching the organization. Kim, you can go to the next slide. And this is the board that I have been referencing. So as Kim said, we are governed by a tripartite board of directors, which means we have 3 distinct groups that are represented on our board: neighborhood representatives, nonprofit representatives, and public and private sector representatives. It is a very diverse board, and we have a lot of different critical perspectives that are at the table informing all of our decisions, particularly that of people that live in the neighborhoods in which we are operating, as well as homeowners that live in Atlanta Land Trust homes. Here you can see, though, I want to point out on the right side under public and private sector representatives, you see that we have a couple of seats that are designated specifically for city and other public entity representatives, including the Land Bank, the City of Atlanta, Invest Atlanta is represented on our board, as is the Atlanta Housing Authority. But the really critical seat here for this conversation is the seat that is held by the Fulton County City of Atlanta Land Bank Authority, or Metro Atlanta Land Bank, which was held by Chris for a number of years, 10 years about, and is now held by one of his board members, Kate Little. That involvement of Chris in the organization throughout our history really set the stage for an effective collaboration and partnership between our two organizations. When I was hired in 2018, Chris was chair of the board, and he immediately recognized that we needed to identify a source for property in order to have land on which to develop our permanently affordable homes. As executive director of the land bank, he knew that they had that resource at the land bank. And so he really served to create the connection between the two organizations. And it was really with the support of the Center for Community Progress that we were able to really formalize that partnership. And we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like. Next slide, Kim. I'm going to hand it over to Chris. He's going to touch on this one.
Okay. So one thing that was happening in the backdrop of all of this in the city of Atlanta, similar to a lot of cities across the country, there was a concern about affordability. You know, how do you deal with enjoying the growth that comes along with, you know, the companies moving, folks moving to your particular city, but also you start putting pressure on the affordability pipeline. And so House ATL was created, which is a broad coalition of parties across the city of Atlanta. One Atlanta emerged as the plan coming from the mayor's office. At that point, Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms. And it was really focused on basically how do we have this One Atlanta where basically multiple tiers of incomes and backgrounds can actually comfortably live in the city as we enjoy all the prosperity that's coming our way. And so one of those things that was included in there was two particular items. One was focused on this community land trust idea sounds great. Let's see if we can really support its growth. And then also we have this entity called the land bank. And so how can we also look at this land bank and utilize its powers to, deal with blighted properties and other types of properties that exist and move them forward. So, as we started talking through this, and of course, Amanda's kind of pointed out my unique position with the land trust, having been on the board, kind of had a little bit of an insider perspective there. We started agreeing that it would make sense that if the land bank came into possession of property, particularly in the service area of the land trust, that we need to figure out a way to get that property into the land trust pipeline so that we could actually end up with permanently affordable housing that would be there for the long term. And that really became more apparent that we could not be in situations where we have one turn of a property where we have, you subsidize it, you develop it, family moves in, they enjoy it for a few years, then ultimately it flips out to the market. That was not something that we felt would be in the long-term interest of everyone. So we said, let's come together. So we started thinking through. So land bank, basically we did two things. The first thing we did was create a permanent affordable pricing policy by saying that as it stands today, the Atlanta Land Trust is the predominant and really the only operative land trust in Atlanta. But let's say in the instance there are other land trusts to emerge outside of Amanda's service area, how would we interact with them? So we created a permanent affordability pricing policy, which states that if an organization in the city decides they want to pursue the land trust model, the maximum price we will charge them for any property is 35% of the market value. So we're basically going to invest 65% of the equity into that particular that transaction, right? So we said that was step one. Then we said, okay, great. We have our policy in place now. Step two is this execute, right? Let's have a live example of this thing. And so, of course, we turned over, and then the land trust is that example. And so we entered into a memorandum of understanding with the land trust, which basically lays out, all the ways in which we're going to work together. And particularly started off with 14 properties as part of our pilot that we had said, look, we're restricting these properties are going to go to the land trust. They have first dibs. Unless Amanda at some point decides she doesn't want them, they have the full right to basically acquire these below this, at our discounted threshold, and then move them into their pipeline. And I do want to give a little bit of a background for some of these properties because, we do acquire properties from different places. Some of these properties came from a criminal seizure. The United States Attorney in North Georgia basically pursued a money laundering drug case. And as part of the resolution of that case and the indictment and conviction of the party, they released some of their properties to them. And those properties were then in turn conveyed to the land bank so that we could pursue community desired outcomes, which in this case is this land trust model. So I just want to kind of point out that your land bank, as you get those things up and going, you find unique sources of property, but I think it also reinforces this notion of partnership that goes beyond your organization. To be successful, you have to do that. So this is kind of where we're operating under this MOU. And basically, this is our first iteration of which we intend to be, dozens of properties coming from the land bank to the land trust. But this also gives us a framework that's not ad hoc. So now Amanda doesn't have to think about, well, gee, how do I do this? Or if I leave the land bank, then she doesn't have to, this is not a personality driven arrangement. This is a institutional organizational arrangement, whereby now we have both parties and both boards. Our board has approved this and their board has approved this. So both boards are now in alignment in terms of how we basically execute. So,
and I would just add that the formalization of this policy in this program is really important for the reasons that Chris just outlined. But it's also really important to our funders to see that there is a formal partnership in place that governs this relationship, and that it gives them the confidence to invest in this program and in these homes because they know that has been formalized. It also establishes a precedent for how we can work with other organizations, particularly other public entities. So the pilot program is a demonstration of how we can do this work with the land bank, but our hope is also that it can be a demonstration of how we can work with other public agencies in Atlanta, like Invest Atlanta, which is the city's economic development agency, or even Atlanta Housing.
Mm-hmm. And there was one question that I think spoke to, how does the land bank decide to move its properties out in terms of, who is on the backside of the development side of these deals. So this also gives us the ability to partner with somebody who has basically been vetted. So understand that we're working in the best interest of the community. And so partnering with the land trust is we've also have a high level of confidence that they're going to be able to execute, that once they receive these 14 properties and many more down the road, that they will actually move them from their distressed, current, non-productive state, to something that's going to be a nice property. You're going to have a resident there. And then also they're going to provide all their support that goes along with being a land trust, the stewardship, the other parts that goes with being a land trust. So it actually is it's a very nice relationship to have when we start trying to figure out, well, gee, we have a lot of property now. Who do we actually work with to convey it to? Because the ultimate goal for us is a productive property. So we don't want to have serial conveyances to one party that fails, then we have to turn and convey it to another party that might fail, and then you convey it to another. So we actually want to have this a one turn, get this bad property to a good partner. That partner creates a nice product, and then based on this permanent model, it's going to be there for a long period of time. So yes. All right. So here this kind of speaks again to a little bit about, and I think I've alluded to some of these elements of the partnership between the land bank and the land trust. So again, the last bullet point being that this has been blessed by both boards and all of it. So I actually think I have alluded to most of these items here. So we can move forward to this. So Amanda, you can talk about where they're located relative to your footprint.
Sure. So the map that you have in front of you depicts the 14 properties that we will be working with the land bank on. The green circle that you see on the map is the Atlanta BeltLine corridor. So again, it's a 22-mile corridor that connects several in-town neighborhoods. In the middle of the BeltLine is downtown Atlanta and midtown Atlanta, which is our central business district. And the BeltLine itself is connecting 45 neighborhoods across the city of Atlanta. So we're really focused on developing homes that are in close proximity to the BeltLine, ideally within the planning area, which is roughly a half a mile to either side of the corridor. You can see these homes generally fall within that planning area or are in a neighborhood that is within the planning area, really ranging from on the north side, the community of Grove Park, which is where we are opening a new city park called the West Side Park, which is now the largest park in the city of Atlanta, so a major public investment. And it's also the location of the new Microsoft 90-acre campus in Atlanta. So both of those major investments are driving a lot of investment in this community, in the real estate, pushing up property values, and resulting in a lot of displacement. Going south along the corridor is the neighborhoods of Vine City and English Avenue, which are immediately to the west of the Mercedes-Benz Stadium, which is another major public-private investment. Continuing south over to the Pittsburgh neighborhood, which is just south of downtown and of the new Georgia State University campus, which has taken over Turner Field, which is where the Atlanta Braves used to play. So we're really trying to be in close proximity to the BeltLine, but also follow major public investments to ensure that those public investments are not resulting in the displacement of the people that are funding those investments, the taxpayers and citizens of Atlanta. So this is where our properties are that we are getting from the land bank, but it's also where most of our activity is taking place as well. So it really aligns with our overall strategy, where we can operate at a citywide scale, but to really be effective and connect with the communities in which we're operating, we have to have a more narrow footprint. So this really reflects that.
And I do want to point out that, whereas we're happy to be able to give Amanda this opportunity to pursue these particular properties, like right smack dab in the middle of all this activity that's going on, I think timing is important. When Kim was going through the whole breakdown between land banks and land trust, if you're kind of forward looking, your land bank is really this kind of a patient landowner in your respective communities. You want to move property out, but also some of this was acquired before the spikes in activity. So before Microsoft announced they were coming to Atlanta, before the West Side Park, which is, if you've been to Atlanta, is actually our main park. We're famous for is Piedmont. Well, the new West Side Park is twice the size of that park. It has a water feature that was featured in the Fast and the Furious. If you've seen the scene where they jump the car into this quarry, well, that's actually part of this park. So it's a really big water feature. So there's a lot of excitement. So people are moving there. And what has happened in some of these neighborhoods, prices have gone from an acquisition of $25,000, $35,000 for a house that was distressed to $200,000 in a matter of 5 years. And so we've been able to acquire these properties before that happened. And so as you start thinking through the economics of this process and processes, your land bank is able to basically connect with properties at a different level of their maturation. So you can get them a little cheaper than if you have to buy it outright on the market. If Amanda has to go and buy a lot for $250,000, well, her ability to basically produce an affordable unit on that piece of property is severely restricted. So we're trying to provide some type of equity value to her via our acquisition of that property and convey it at a discounted value. So if you start thinking broadly about these programs and you say, well, why is this important from a land bank partnering with a land trust, you kind of have to think holistically of moving this property via the pipeline to a place where it's still affordable to even develop it into something that's productive. So don't discount the value of the public's role and basically help them with the affordability pipeline. So I did want to point that out, that a lot of these properties were acquired before the big pops. So.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Chris and Amanda. So I'm going to go through the last slide or two extremely quickly. So I just want to give everyone a heads up that we are going to be moving to Q&A. So I have a list of some of the questions that folks have posed during the presentation that we haven't gotten to, but please now take some time to start putting more of your questions so we can field those in a second. So I think it's important to just kind of end with, why aren't there more partnerships, and what have been some of the biggest obstacles that we've heard loud and clear from different land banks and CLTs? And I don't think anything on the slide is going to be a huge surprise to anyone who's participating in the webinar, but it all goes down to communication and really understanding what land banks and what CLTs do, right? What are their superpowers? What are their missions? And also really addressing kind of the elephant in the room, which is that, a lot of people don't think that they need affordable housing in their community. Or a lot of land bank leaders we've talked to said, no, we don't want permanent affordable housing. We have plenty of affordable housing. So I think some conversations need to be had about what a land bank is, what a CLT is, and what the actual community goals and support is for affordable housing. I always say that there's a difference between having low cost housing or land than quality permanent affordable housing. Two very different things. I think it's also really important to understand that each land bank and CLT has their mutual challenges and constraints. So one of the questions that we'll get to is about, funding sources. And I think there's so much competition right now for limited funding that we have seen in various communities that when land banks and CLTs actually partner for funding opportunities, the bounty is shared much broader with the organizations when they're not competing with each other. And this is simply just an example. I'm sure almost all of you know by now that there is the American Rescue Plan Act has $350 million that is going to local, state, territory, tribal governments. And, this is an example of how a land bank and CLT partnership, the case can be made. By reducing the acquisition cost and having the land bank actually create that pipeline of property is huge. In a sample project that we've just put together for 50 units, that could be up to $500,000 in subsidy that's saved. In addition, again, Amanda mentioned this and I mentioned this before, that subsidy is going to stay in that property, in that unit for lifetimes, right? In perpetuity. So I think to think about what are the funding sources that are available right now and how to make that case. So here are just some questions for you all to think about if you're exploring land banks and CLTs. And there are a lot of additional resources that are available. This first publication to the left is the Land Bank and Community Land Trust publication that I wrote that Amanda and Chris are featured in, along with the folks in Albany, as well as the folks in Columbus, Ohio. Also talks about, some of the other examples of partnerships. I know we have some folks from Richmond, Virginia, who are participating in the webinar today. They have a unique partnership in Richmond where the land bank is a program of the CLT, given the state land bank legislation there. So we are going to go into Q&A. So I have written down a few questions that I've seen, and we'll try to continue checking comments and questions and all of that. So one of the questions that came up is what is flexible funding? What is the purpose and the need for flexible funding to support a land bank CLT partnership? And one of the things that I just want to throw out there, and Chris and Amanda, I want you to comment on, is funding is needed just for basic operations of both of your entities, right? Mm-hmm. Like above and beyond what the partnership does, you all need to keep your doors open and to have really quality staff. You also need the funding to actually, subsidize. A land bank does need money to acquire the properties. Even though they could do it for less money and have more flexibility, they still need to keep the lights on. And Amanda, I know that you've talked about the importance of having that flexible funding on the back end for the subsidy to make these units as affordable as possible. Are there any other sort of sources or means for this flexible funding that you could think of that would be important for your partnership?
The most flexible sources are those that we earn. So if you run a nonprofit organization, you know that you have earned income and contributed income. So actually, earned income is the most flexible. Those are fees that we would earn through development fees, stewardship fees, ground lease fees. Those are great because we can use those however we want to. Contributed income is income that we then get from individual contributions as well as grants from public and private sources. So a lot of the work that we do relies upon grants from public agencies. Invest Atlanta, I've mentioned a couple of times in particular, has been a good source. That's local government funding. And then the philanthropic community in Atlanta has also been a really important source for us. We actually have an $11 million capital campaign underway, which will fund three larger scale projects that we have in pre-development right now, a total of 120 units. And we have raised about 7.5 of that 11 million. And that's coming from, again, both public and private funding sources. But that's critical. We can't do the work that we do without subsidy, because the construction costs and the land acquisition costs, even though we're getting land from the land bank at a highly discounted price, there are still costs that we incur, and we have to buy down the sales price with subsidy. So it's really that source is required of almost any project we do.
Mm-hmm. Great.
And I would just say quickly, as you point out, Kim, yeah, we still have to keep the lights on. You still have to operate it, even though we're a government entity. We have maintenance costs, we have insurance costs, we have other things that are in play prior to the property going to our development partner. So, people dumping, we have to keep the grass cut. We have to be a good community partner with the land itself and the house before it's conveyed. So you do have those types of things. And similar to Amanda, we are in a position as a land bank to earn income or profits off of land that we convey. So where we would love to be able to give property away for free, is often a question, and that's a legitimate question to ask. It's just not possible currently to be in a pure donation posture. But we do like to operate in a discounted environment because, again, our interests are aligned with the community and the goals of the land trust. So,
great. So there are a few questions that are alluding to the role of community engagement. And does the land bank engage residents? How does the CLT do it? So can you all talk briefly about the way you engage community and the residents that are most impacted by vacancy and abandonment and that have the least quality affordable housing options, and whether you think your partnership has bolstered your ability to do that as an organization, or how has that worked?
Okay. So since it's directed to us first, I'll do that. And Amanda does have the community part she can speak to. So our board is represented by, we have 7 board members that are all political appointments. And so to come onto the board, you're actually appointed by either the mayor of the city of Atlanta or by the county commission from the Fulton County side. And so these are typically people that have some type of relationship with at a community level. And therefore they're able to, convey that kind of spirit and the questions and things that they want to see in those communities to them. But we also operate with, close to our other partners with the city of Atlanta, the housing department, with Invest Atlanta. We also in Atlanta have the neighborhood planning unit system, which basically provides representation throughout all of the respective communities. And so we do certain types of actions, and we have large tax extinguishments or things of that nature. We do inform citizens and those MPUs of activity so that they can do that. And all of our activity, all of our meetings are public. And so everything is open in the age of COVID. The last couple of years, everything's been virtual. So actually, it's probably been a little easier to attend because you actually just click on the Zoom link and you can pop in. But when we start meeting back in person, all meetings are public. Anyone is able to show up. And then, of course, we do have actual physical offices where people are able to come in and talk to us about projects and things that may be of interest and concern to the community. So.
Well, as I shared, we have the tripartite board of directors. So a third of our board is made up of individuals that specifically represent the neighborhoods in which we're actively working. On the other groups within our board, nonprofit and public and private sector stakeholders, we also have lots of representatives that also live in the communities where we're working. So there's a fair amount of overlap there. But we really try and be very intentional about community engagement. We have a monthly community information session that community members and prospective homebuyers are invited to attend, where we review the work that we're doing and how to participate in the process. But we also go to a lot of community meetings. We try and meet people where they are. We go to neighborhood planning unit meetings, which Chris referenced. We also go to neighborhood association meetings. We have 2 full-time staff right now, so we're limited in how many meetings we can go to. So we really try and focus our efforts on those neighborhoods where we are most actively working. In addition to going to regular meetings, we sometimes will host special meetings for specific neighborhoods. So if we have a big project in a specific neighborhood, we will partner with the neighborhood association to host an event specifically for those residents, so that they have an opportunity to learn about the project, provide input, ask questions, and then get in early if they are interested in buying a home there. So we've done that in a couple of instances. And like Chris said, we've been virtual over the past 2 years and have found that that has increased engagement pretty significantly. But we also recognize that not everybody is comfortable with virtual. So we will start doing more in-person things this year.
Great. So there's a lot of questions about sort of the technical aspects of land banks and of CLTs that we unfortunately don't have time to get into, but I am going to say that the National Land Bank Network, which is part of the program of the Center for Community Progress, and the Center for Community Progress has a ton of information about how land banks work that could answer some of those questions. And on the flip side, with Community Land Trust, Granite Solutions Network has just a ton of information and toolkits to really talk about, lenders and the ways that they keep properties affordable, all of that. I want to sort of end this, since we only have 2 or 3 minutes left, which is there anything that you can share about your partnership that everyone who took the time to join this webinar simply would not be able to learn from anything that's publicly available? Advice, guidance, a unique aspect that we haven't talked about. Is there anything you'd like to share that you think could be helpful, that could be a little neat prize for everyone who took the time to join us today?
Well, I think for us, this isn't really a secret. I've talked about this, but I think the board structure is really important because we intentionally pulled in everybody that is important to our work, that can influence policy, that can influence funding, onto our board. So they're in our family, and they then become advocates and ambassadors for us. So I think that board structure is critically important, and not just having the right seats when you create the board, but being really thoughtful about who those individuals are that you pull in.
I'd say both organizations being really mutually supportive of this idea of this partnership. It might sound kind of, is that really a big deal? But it really is, because then you have the buy-in to put the energy and the resources and also the dedication of time, because we're talking about stuff that span years. We're not talking about a 1 month or 2 month. So you actually have to have this buy-in, and it kind of permeates this whole your ecosystem. And so you become, evangelists for this idea of the land bank and land trust. And so this spills over to your political leaders. It spills over to your philanthropic leaders in your community. It spills over to the corporate citizens they're always asking, well, how can I help? So you have an answer to the question, say, well, gee, we have something for you. How about this permanently affordable thing here? And we're trying to leverage all of that. So I would say, so do not understate the importance of having buy-in, because I've seen in some of the comments of some, land bank parties don't believe in this, or the land trust don't. Try to get everybody together and mutually supportive. And I think that's going to go a huge way to basically having some success that's sustainable. And it's not just a one-off success, but something that actually has some staying power.
Yep. Great points. So I need to hand it off to Christina to close things down, but I know, Christina, you're going to thank everyone, but I really just wanted to personally thank Amanda and Chris again for your leadership and your willing to continue chatting with us at Community Progress, and to all of you who participated in this webinar. If there are questions we didn't get to, we will try to definitely get you some answers afterwards. But Christina, you could talk about what the follow-up will be.
Yes, again, thank you so much, Kim, Chris, and Amanda. Fantastic presentation. As you can see, there are a ton of questions in the chat. There's even networking happening right now. So you can see that people are really interested in this work. Just a reminder to everyone, we will send a recording of this presentation in the days following the webinar, and we will also send a copy of the presentation slides. So be on the lookout for that email. And again, thank you for joining us for our first Cornerstone of 2022. Please be sure to visit our website at communityprogress.org and join our listserv to stay up to date on future webinar announcements. Have a great afternoon, everyone.